know how some moments sneak up on you, wrapped in the ordinary, and yet they split your life in two, everything before it and everything after. This is one of those moments. She didn't expect much that evening, just another family wedding, a glittering room where she would fade into the background, politely nod through champagne toasts, then disappear into the night. She wore a thrifted olive dress, not because she liked taste, but because she lacked options. Her name was Claire Bennett, and no one expected her to shine. But life has a curious sense of timing. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone sees you, really sees you, not in spite of your quiet, but because of it. And in the middle of the chandeliers and champagne flutes, in a room where she was sure she didn't belong, Claire was about to meet a man who would change her life with a single question. May I have this dance? He wasn't just handsome. He wasn't just rich. He wasn't even just kind. He was a man who lived in a world far removed from hers. A man of tailored suits, press conferences, and private jets. And yet, for some reason, he sat beside the girl at table 9. And nothing was ever the same again. So stay with us, because this isn't a fairy tale about glass slippers or magic spells. It's about courage, timing, and the quiet bravery of showing up, even when you feel invisible, and what happens when the right person sees you anyway. Subscribe to John's Stories channel for more slow-burning, heartwarming stories that unfold one quiet miracle at a time. New content every day.
The invitation wasn't even addressed to me, not really. To the Bennett family, it said, in calligraphy too perfect to feel personal. My mom had planned to come. She knew the bride's mother from childhood summers in Cape Cod. But a fever and a stubborn cough kept her home. So I went instead, her lone representative. In her words, go make an appearance, eat a fancy meal, and tell them I sent my love. I nearly turned around at the hotel entrance. The Atoria Grand looked like something out of a movie. Golden chandeliers spilling light over polished marble floors, valet drivers in crisp uniforms, and women in silk gowns the color of expensive wine. My heels clicked too loudly as I stepped through the entrance, my dress suddenly feeling too matte, too lived in. I tried to smooth it, but thrift store fabric doesn't forget its history. I'd worn this olive green number maybe 30 times, to book club, a church recital, even a job interview once. Each time I hoped it would transform me. It never did. Inside the ballroom, the music floated like champagne bubbles. Elegant, detached, effortless. Laughter mingled with crystal, and every table was a portrait of wealth. I clutched my tiny black clutch, more of a pocket than a purse, and searched for table 9. Found it, nearly hidden behind a massive white floral installation. Of course, the overflow table. Distant cousins, solo guests, people who didn't quite fit. It was a relief, honestly. I took my seat quietly, smiled politely to the older couple beside me who barely glanced up. Their conversation resumed. Something about their summer house in Aspen and a yacht share in Monaco. I poked at my salad, nodding occasionally, trying to disappear. And then the chair beside me pulled out. I didn't look up right away, just assumed it was another forgotten guest relegated to this quiet little corner. But then came a voice, deep, warm, calm. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up and forgot how to breathe. He was tall, not just tall, composed. His tuxedo fit like it had been made for him yesterday, not borrowed off a rack. Hair dark but soft-looking, eyes a gray I'd never seen before, like rain clouds in the distance. Not cold, just thoughtful. "No, please," I managed to say, gesturing to the chair like I was offering a throne. "Thanks," he said, sitting down without the awkwardness most people wear like a coat. He turned to me with a smile. "I'm Daniel Carrington." I tried not to choke on my own name. Claire Bennett." He extended a hand, a firm, dry handshake, no pretense. And then, as if we were old friends, he asked, "Bride or groom?" "Bride, sort of," I said, smiling shyly. "She's my cousin, or my cousin's daughter, one of those extended family tree branches nobody remembers until a wedding shows up." Daniel laughed, not just politely, really laughed, like it delighted him to hear someone admit they didn't belong here either. He leaned in slightly. "I'm the groom's best friend. Supposed to be helping with boutonnieres or champagne trays or something like that, but I ducked out." "Brave," I said. "Reckless, but I think I made the right decision." His gaze didn't waver. I should have looked away, but I didn't. You know, there are rare moments when the world softens, when the noise dies down and someone is looking at you, not through you. That's what it felt like. Like I'd stepped out of the wallpaper and into the painting. The band started a slow, melodic tune, something timeless, the kind of song that makes people instinctively reach for someone's hand. "Would you like to dance?" Daniel asked. I froze. "Oh, I don't really, I'm not good." "Lucky for you," he said, standing with a hand extended. "I am." I laughed. God, I actually laughed, this tiny nervous sound that felt like spring thawing in my chest. And I took his hand. I hadn't danced in years, not since my sister's wedding, where I clumsily spun with our grandfather while trying not to step on his orthopedic shoes. But Daniel, he moved like he didn't even need music, like the rhythm came from somewhere inside him. Confident, but never arrogant. Gentle, like he was more focused on making me feel graceful than showing off. The chandelier light flickered above us, and I forgot the rules. I forgot to be shy, forgot I wasn't wearing designer silk, forgot that my shoes were half a size too tight. I forgot the little voice in my head that usually whispers, "Don't draw attention." For the length of that song, I felt like I belonged. "You're full of surprises, Claire Bennett," he murmured, a smile in his voice. I looked up, laughed softly. "You've known me 10 minutes. "Long enough," he said. When the song faded, we drifted back to table 9. Something had shifted, not around us, but within me. I wasn't invisible anymore. We talked about books, food, the one bakery in my neighborhood that still used handwritten signs in the window, about how much I loved libraries, not just for the books, but for the quiet way they made space for people. Daniel didn't interrupt once. He asked real questions. He listened like what I said wasn't filler, like it mattered. And maybe that's what caught me off guard the most. I wasn't used to being listened to like that, not without an agenda. I didn't notice the time, didn't see the waitstaff clearing plates or the guests drifting toward the dessert table, but I did notice his watch. It caught the light just enough for me to glimpse the face. Minimalist, matte black, no brand showing, but I recognized the craftsmanship. It was the kind of watch that didn't scream money. It whispered legacy. Other things came into focus. The way the servers looked at him, not just politely, but deferentially. The way he carried himself with a kind of self-assured stillness. Even the way his shoulders relaxed when he was near me. as if he was used to holding something tight, something invisible. "So," I said, casually, like it wasn't the biggest question I'd ever asked someone, "what do you do for work?" He paused, just for a second. "He runs a few companies, mostly in tech." "Just a few?" I teased. He smiled, but the air shifted. A faint line creased his brow. "Claire," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If I were someone you'd seen on TV or read about online, would it change how you see me?" I blinked. "Are you saying I have seen you on TV?" He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. I leaned back, folded my arms gently. "Well, I guess it depends on the kind of famous you are." That made him laugh, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, something raw. The kind that makes people stop being genuine. That's the kind I try not to be. "You're analyzing me now," he added after a beat, half teasing. I shook my head. "No, I'm just curious." "Then permission granted." There was a vulnerability in that line, hidden beneath charm, behind the practiced calm. It wasn't flirtation, it was a door cracking open. But he wasn't the only one with hidden truths. I kept wondering if I was foolish being so open with someone who clearly belonged to a world I'd only ever seen in headlines. What was I doing sharing bookstore stories with the man who probably had an assistant who curated his wardrobe? And yet, he was here, at this forgotten table. Not out of pity, not for effect, but because somehow, in the middle of all the noise, he had chosen to sit beside me. The wedding wound down slowly, that warm hush that lingers after a long day. Couples posed near the cake, music softened into background piano, and laughter turned into whispers. But Daniel and I stayed seated, side by side, like time had carved a pocket just for us. "I should probably head out," I said, finally checking my watch. "It's getting late." Daniel nodded, but didn't move. "Do you need a ride?" "I'll take the subway. It's not far." He didn't argue, didn't insist, just stood with me in silence, letting the night stretch a little longer. And then, right before I turned away, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it out. "If you don't mind," he said, voice suddenly quiet, "could I have your number?" It was such a simple request. No grand declarations, just a soft thread connecting two strangers. I typed in my name, my number, handed it back. He glanced at the screen and smiled. "I'll call. I'm not about to let the girl from table 9 disappear." And I swear in that moment, it didn't matter how expensive his watch was or how many companies he owned. It mattered that he saw me, that I mattered. No hug, no kiss, just a shared pause, two people holding on to something fragile and new. As I stepped out into the city night, the wind slipped under my coat, and I shivered, not from cold, but from the leftover hum of something that had just begun. He waited 3 days. Not 1, not 2, but 3. And on the morning of the 3rd day, just as I'd convinced myself it was all a charming illusion, a fleeting spark that couldn't survive daylight, he texted, "Hey Claire, the world's too loud today. I need quiet. Dinner? Just us? No chandeliers. I promise." I stared at the screen far longer than I should have. I typed yes and deleted it 3 times before finally replying, "Sure, but I'll meet you there. I'm working at the library until 6. He answered almost instantly, I'll pick you up at 7. Not can I, not would you mind, just I want to. There was something grounding in that. At 6:59 sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside the library. Not a limo, not flashy, just quiet power. The kind of car that doesn't need to announce itself. I opened the door, expecting a driver, but it was him, Daniel. In a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, the top 2 buttons undone like he didn't need to impress anyone but still somehow did. No laptop open, no bodyguard in the front seat, just him, and a warmth in his eyes that softened everything. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the car, woodsy, clean, like late autumn. It wasn't cologne from a bottle, it felt lived in. "You look," he began. I glanced down at myself. Just a simple navy wrap dress and flats I could walk 3 miles in. "You look like peace," he finished. I blushed. Nobody had ever said that to me before. We drove in comfortable silence, and that too surprised me. He wasn't one of those people who feared silence. He let it breathe, like he understood that words meant more when you chose them carefully. The restaurant wasn't one of those rooftop towers or velvet-draped places that require a password. It was tucked away in Soho, all candlelight, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out onto the city. No hostess asked for a name. No menus, just a nod from a man in a vest who led us to a private table in the corner, like he already knew Daniel's rhythm. The food was simple. French, I think, but honestly, I barely noticed. What overwhelmed me was how Daniel watched me. Not in a possessive way, but like he was trying to memorize something he didn't want to forget. "You're not used to this, are you?" he asked. I smiled, a little self-conscious. Not the restaurant. Not this world. He nodded, slowly, then swirled his wine in quiet thought. "You know something funny?" he said. "Sometimes I'm not used to it either." That caught me off guard. "You built it, though, didn't you?" He exhaled through his nose, a quiet, tired sound. "I did, but over time it started building me, or rebuilding me, into someone shinier, louder, more palatable. I stopped knowing which version of me was real." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. "There's Daniel Carrington, CEO. He's at board meetings, shaking hands, making decisions worth millions. And then there's me, the guy who forgets to buy toothpaste and who still calls his sister on Sundays just to hear her complain about her dog." He looked at me then, fully, like he needed me to see what wasn't usually seen. "You're tired of playing parts, Claire." I reached across the table, not thinking, just feeling, and placed my hand over his. "No masks with me," I whispered. He smiled. That soft, kind of pain smile people wear when they're not sure whether to believe or hope. "Thank you," he said, quietly, genuinely. There's something disarming about seeing a man like that, someone who probably sits across from investors and negotiates billion-dollar deals, say thank you like it's the most vulnerable word he knows. And just like that, something shifted between us. Not love, not yet, but respect, warmth. A door that had cracked open now gently swinging wider. He walked me home that night. Didn't ask to come up, didn't linger with expectation,
just stood under the dim streetlight outside my building, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on mine. "You make it impossible to look away," he said. I laughed nervously. "That sounds like a line." "It is, but it's true too." The next few weeks unfolded like autumn leaves, quiet, golden, real. Midday coffee drop-offs when he knew I had a break, walks through the park, sometimes in silence, sometimes lost in rambling conversations about childhood, bad high school haircuts, and the scent of freshly baked bread. We weren't building a romance on adrenaline. We were building something else. Presence. One afternoon, while I was shelving books at the library, he texted me. "Need to escape. The world's too loud again. Want to come?" No destination, no agenda, just trust. I said yes.
The drive felt endless, but in the best way. Like time stretched itself to make room for something important. Daniel barely spoke as we left the city, and I didn't press him. He wasn't brooding, just thoughtful. The kind of quiet you carry when you've been too loud for too long. The kind of quiet that feels like healing. The sky darkened as we turned off the main road and onto a narrow, tree-lined path. Pines towered on both sides, their shadows dancing on the windshield. The car slowed, and finally, there it was. A cabin. Small, wooden, set beside a still lake that mirrored the last streaks of violet sunset. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a golden circle on the worn steps. Daniel stepped out first, grabbing our overnight bags, then walked to the front door with the ease of someone coming home, not visiting. "I bought this place a few years ago," he said, unlocking the door, "back when everything started moving too fast." "Why here?" I asked. He paused. "Because no one here calls me CEO." Inside, the space smelled like cedar, cinnamon, and something faintly floral, maybe laundry sheets. The decor was simple: old books, soft blankets, a few black and white photos on the mantle. No art chosen for aesthetic. Everything here felt touched, chosen, lived in. We cooked together that night. Or rather, I cooked. Daniel chopped carrots like they were foreign objects. He splashed water on the floor while rinsing dishes, then laughed, a boyish sound that didn't belong to a man who wore suits worth more than my car. At dinner, over pasta and a bottle of red he'd brought, the conversation drifted to the in-between places. Regrets, ambitions, the strange ache of growing older without really growing up. "You know," he said, stirring his wine, "people think success feels like a spotlight. But for me, it felt more like glass walls." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Everyone sees you, but no one really sees you. You're on display, performing constantly. Even the compliments feel scripted." I nodded. "You're the brand." "Exactly." He looked at me, voice softening. "You're the first person who makes me feel human again." I wanted to cry. Not out of sadness, just that aching tenderness that comes when someone tells you the thing they've never said aloud, and they choose you to hear it. Later, we sat by the lake on a thick plaid blanket. The stars above us were the kind you never see in the city, layered, endless, like secrets waiting to be told. Daniel lay beside me, one arm behind his head. I used to come here alone and just breathe. No noise, no press, no pretending. I rolled to my side, resting my head near his shoulder. "You don't have to pretend with me." He turned toward me, eyes reflecting starlight.
That's what scares me. I didn't say anything. I just slid my hand into his. You don't fix someone like Daniel Carrington. You simply let him unfold. And in the silence of that lakeside night, he did, piece by piece. His fears, his loneliness, the way success had given him everything except a place to belong. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. The intimacy wasn't in the touch. It was in the stillness, in the trust, in the fact that he let me see the man behind the title. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Daniel humming, off-key but endearing. He stood in the small kitchen, barefoot, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and I'd never seen him look more beautiful. We ate breakfast on the porch, toast and jam, and the last of the wine-soaked strawberries we hadn't finished the night before. At one point, he turned to me and said, "I hope this place feels like yours too." It took everything in me not to say. It already does. Before we left, I stepped back onto the porch alone and looked at the cabin one last time. Not for its view, but because it had become something sacred. It was the first place I'd seen the real Daniel, not the man from magazines, the man who trusted me with silence. A few weeks later, he invited me to a tech charity gala, the kind of event that made headlines and trended on Twitter before the first champagne toast. "I don't know, Daniel," I said as we sat in a corner cafe, fingers laced across a chipped wooden table. "I don't own anything even close to what people wear to those things. I wouldn't know what to say to anyone there." He squeezed my hand gently. "I don't want you to impress them. I want you beside me. That's all." So I went, wearing a borrowed dress, hair pinned by my best friend in the library's bathroom 20 minutes before Daniel arrived. I felt like a candle walking into a room full of chandeliers. But Daniel, he never let go of my hand, not once. People whispered. Some smiled politely, others raised their eyebrows, but he never flinched, and neither did I. At one point, a poised woman in her 50s, all elegance and sharp eyes, pulled him aside and said, "She's lovely, but are you sure she fits into all this?" And he replied, loud enough for me to hear, "She reminds me of who I was before I forgot who I wanted to be." That night, as we walked home, he didn't say much, just held my hand tighter. And I realized something then. I wasn't afraid of his world, but I think maybe his world was afraid of me.
I should have known it wouldn't last. Not the love, no, that was real, but the silence, this sacred space we had carved from city noise and boardroom bravado, that quiet cocoon, it was never going to hold forever. The whispers began like mist at dawn. Who is she? A mystery woman spotted at the Carrington Foundation Gala. Photos, blurry, distant, but unmistakably me. One grainy smile as I glanced up at Daniel under the ballroom lights. Headlines called it unexpected. Some called it charming, but others weren't so kind. I remember the moment everything changed. Daniel came straight from a high-stakes meeting. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that burrows under your ribs and stays. We were at my apartment, sitting on the floor, folding laundry together. I liked the normalcy of it. He said it helped him breathe. But that day, something was off. He sat silently for too long, a half-folded towel in his lap, gaze distant.
What happened? I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. Richard Munro pulled me aside after the meeting, said the board's worried. Investors are asking questions. They think I'm distracted. I blanked. Because of me? He nodded. Because you're not from our world. Because you don't wear couture or give rehearsed interviews. Because you're not a curated narrative. I should have cried, but I didn't. Instead, I said the only thing I could with the calm I didn't feel. If loving me puts your world at risk, I won't be the reason it crumbles. His head snapped up. Claire, I'm not asking you to fight for me, I said softly, only to be honest about whether you want to. He didn't answer, not right away, and that silence, it said more than anything. He left quietly that night. No argument, no anger, just a quiet kiss on my forehead and a promise that felt like a goodbye in disguise. I don't know how he got through the next week. Maybe autopilot, maybe muscle memory. But I do know this. The man I met at table 9 had never felt farther away. Until the boardroom. I wasn't there, of course, but I've heard the story enough times now to feel like I was. Daniel walked into the Carrington Innovations quarterly review meeting. Every seat was filled. Investors, executives, department heads, PR reps. The mood was tight, controlled. He stood at the head of the table, placed both hands down firmly, and said, I've heard the concerns. I've read the memos. I know the risk assessments. Silence. Daniel's voice lowered, not soft, but grounded. I am in a relationship. Her name is Claire Bennett. She's not from this world. She doesn't want anything from it. Another pause. Daniel's voice lowered again, not soft, but grounded. She makes me better, not because she's part of my image, but because she doesn't care about it. One of the investors leaned forward. Your private life is bleeding into the brand. That's the issue. No, Daniel replied. The issue is that we've mistaken control for stability. If the brand I built can't withstand authenticity, then it's not worth protecting. That was the moment the tide turned. Not because everyone in that room suddenly became romantic idealists, but because Daniel Carrington, the man they'd once seen as pure strategy, had finally stopped performing. He chose me. I didn't know about any of it until a few days later, when he showed up at the library. No chauffeur, no suit, just jeans, a hoodie, and a slightly rumpled look that made my heart catch. I was hanging posters for a children's reading event, standing on a ladder, trying to tape a crooked corner. He didn't say anything at first, just steadied the ladder with one hand and passed me a strip of tape with the other. When I climbed down, he said, "Hi." And just like that, every defense I'd built in his absence crumbled. I thought, he almost did, he said. But I realized I'm done living in halves. One half in the spotlight, one half hiding who I am. And Claire, you're the part I don't want to hide. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, we tried to protect what we had. not with walls, but with boundaries. We returned to the lake cabin once, just the two of us. He cooked scrambled eggs that were way too salty, and I laughed so hard I cried. We took walks in the rain, watched bad indie films in tiny theaters. He once waited outside my office just to give me an umbrella because I'd forgotten mine. These weren't grand gestures, they were real ones. But the world kept knocking. Every time he opened his phone, there was another notification. Every glance in public felt observed. His life was no longer just his. And then the question came.
He didn't tell me where we were going, just that I should pack something warm and bring the coat he liked, the one with the oversized buttons and the soft herringbone pattern I wore on our first bookstore date. The drive was quiet, like the first time, but different. He wasn't nervous now. He was steady, calm in a way that made the silence feel sacred, like music only we could hear. We turned off the road, past the pine trees, and I knew the cabin. But something in the air felt different this time, charged, hushed, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. As the sun dipped low, Daniel took my hand and led me down to the lake. It was the same spot where we'd once watched stars, where he'd told me about feeling human again. Only now, the lake was glass, the sky a ribbon of fading gold, and his hand was trembling slightly in mine. He didn't speak right away, just looked out at the water. Then, in a voice quieter than the wind, he said, "Months ago, I was sitting at a table in the farthest corner of a ballroom, bracing myself for another night of obligations. And then you walked in." He turned to me, pulled something from his jacket, not abruptly, not theatrically, just with meaning. A small velvet box. He knelt. Not on cue, not for show, but because he meant every inch of it. "You changed everything, Claire Bennett. Not with lightning, with presence. You remind me who I was before the applause." He opened the box. Inside, a delicate ring, a quiet shimmer. Nothing oversized, nothing loud. I don't need a perfect world. I just need one with you in it. Will you marry me? I couldn't speak for us. Because, yes. Because always. Because even before he asked, I already belonged. "Yes," I whispered. And when I said it, the wind picked up. Not dramatically, but enough to remind me that nature has its way of acknowledging sacred things. Our wedding wasn't on a yacht. It wasn't in Italy or Bali or whatever locations people expect when the groom is a tech magnate. It was in that same ballroom, the one where it all began. But this time, I wasn't tucked behind a column at table 9. I walked down the aisle, not in a diamond-studded gown, but in something simple, graceful, just silk and intention. When I first tried it on, Daniel whispered, "This is you. Nothing more needed." There were a few raised eyebrows, sure. Vivian, Daniel's PR strategist and longtime confidant, gave me a measured nod as we passed. The kind of nod that says, "You proved me wrong," without having to say the words. Daniel stood at the altar, not with a brand behind him, but as a man who had chosen truth over polish. When I reached him, he didn't look at my dress. He looked at my face, like that alone was enough to tether him to earth.
The ceremony was small, intimate, and when I spoke my vows, I didn't talk about fairy tales. I talked about Table 9, about the man who sat beside me when no one else noticed, about how he made space for me, not because I was flashy, but because I was real. I don't love you because you're Daniel Carrington. I love you because you're the man who passed me the breadbasket like it mattered. Laughter, a few tears, and then stillness. You know how sometimes at weddings, people cheer when the kiss happens? Ours didn't need that. There was no eruption, just quiet, sacred, the kind of silence that means everything just aligned. We live a quiet life now, for the most part. Sure, there are interviews, events, meetings he still has to attend, but there are also mismatched coffee mugs, burnt pancakes, the vase we can't fold correctly. We argue over what to watch on Thursday nights. We forget to buy dishwasher pods. He still can't chop carrots without creating a mess. But he texts me in the middle of meetings just to say, "I miss your face." And I leave sticky notes on his laptop that says, "Still the guy from Table 9. We're not a fairy tale. We're something better. We're real. And maybe that's the point of this whole story. Love doesn't always arrive in a dramatic flash or in the perfectly rehearsed lines of a movie script. Sometimes it comes quietly, in an olive green dress worn too many times, in a mismatched table at the back of a ballroom, in a hand extended not out of pity, but out of possibility. Sometimes it's not the man in the tuxedo who changes your life. It's the man who listens when you talk about your favorite library. It's the man who doesn't try to fix your world, but wants to be part of it. And in a world full of spectacle, maybe the bravest kind of love is the kind that whispers instead of shouts, that sits with you at Table 9 and never, ever lets you disappear. If you've ever felt like you were on the edge of the room, unnoticed, unheard, just remember, the right person doesn't need you to be louder. They just need you to be you. And when that happens, don't be afraid to dance. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, made you think, consider sharing it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey.